In many parts of the country, the housing market is frozen as tariffs, a shaky economy, and conflict in the Middle East keep some potential buyers on the sidelines.
Report shows many people are drowning in debt.
The number of households that will be required to be evicted is...
Ladies and gentlemen, wake up. Canada is not experiencing a soft landing or a healthy correction. What we are living through right now in the spring of 2026 is the brutal, entirely predictable unraveling of a decade-long policy delusion. A delusion that treated housing as an ATM machine for existing owners, a political prop for governments obsessed with high immigration targets, and a speculative casino for investors and developers chasing ever higher prices. The bill has now arrived, and it is shattering families, freezing construction, destroying life savings, and exposing the hollow foundations of what we were repeatedly told was the Canadian dream. This is not hyperbole. This is reality staring us in the face. National home prices have already fallen roughly 20% from the insane 2022 peak. In Toronto and Vancouver, the epicenters of the madness, entire market segments, especially condominiums, have been absolutely gutted. A townhouse in Toronto has lost $525,000 in a single year. Let that number sink in. $500,000 of life savings, retirement security, children's education funds, and future dreams evaporated almost overnight. In Vancouver, condominiums that once commanded prices above $400,000 are now selling at 22.5% losses. In some pockets of both cities, price drops have reached as high as 24%. These are not abstract statistics on a spreadsheet. These are destroyed balance sheets, broken marriages, sleepless nights, and families quietly falling apart. And yet the market is not even in a dramatic freefall that clears the air. It is something far more dangerous and insidious, a slow-motion paralysis, a frozen standoff where almost no one can or will move. Sales volumes in Toronto's condominium market have hit 35-year lows, worse than the late 1980s collapse. Over 4,295 newly completed condominiums sit empty and unsold in the Greater Toronto Area alone as of early 2026, more than double the level from a year ago. When you add units under construction that buyers are walking away from, the shadow inventory swells even larger. In Metro Vancouver, the number of unsold completed and near-completed condos has climbed past 5,000 units. Developers are canceling projects left and right, at least 9 major ones in Toronto already this year. Construction confidence, according to industry reports, is scraping near record lows. The very sector we desperately need to solve our chronic housing shortage is grinding to a halt. This is the nightmare scenario that clear-headed economists and analysts have been warning about for years. A market locked in a vicious, self-reinforcing trap where buyers wait for lower prices, sellers refuse to accept losses, developers cannot finance new projects, and the entire system slowly seizes up. Let us examine the mechanics of this trap in detail. Roughly 68% of Canadian homeowners are still locked into mortgages below 5%. With current longer-term fixed rates hovering around 6.3% as of April 2026, they are not selling. Why on earth would they? Selling means realizing a large loss and then stepping back into the market at much higher carrying costs. So they stay put. They cling desperately to their properties. The result is a severe artificial shortage of listings. Normal market turnover has collapsed. Even buyers who can qualify are sitting on the sidelines, watching prices grind lower month after month, waiting for the blood to finally hit the streets before they commit to what remains the largest financial decision of their lives. At the same time, the real-time bomb is ticking loudly. Nearly 1.15 million mortgages are scheduled to renew in 2026 alone, part of a massive wave that will see almost 2 million renewals across 2025-2026. Many of these were originated in 2020 and 2021 at ultra-low rates between 1.75 and 2.5%. Now, those same families are facing renewals at 4.5 to 6.3% or higher. Monthly payments are jumping by $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, and in some larger loans, even $6,000. One Toronto homeowner recently described having to double his withdrawals from his RRSP just to cover the mortgage and property taxes. That is not manageable stress. That is financial suffocation. That is the slow erosion of retirement savings and future security. Delinquencies are already surging. In the Greater Toronto Area, mortgage delinquencies have tripled since 2022. 90-day arrears in Ontario have doubled since last year. Power of sale listings have doubled in just 1 year and now make up as much as 10% of active listings in some suburban markets. These numbers are no longer theoretical forecasts. They are happening in real time, and this is only the leading edge. As more forced sales and distressed listings enter the market, they will push prices lower, drive more owners into negative equity, and trigger even more defaults. This is the self-reinforcing doom loop that polite policy commentators still euphemistically call a pause or a correction. The regional picture reveals the full carnage. Ontario and British Columbia are bleeding the worst, exactly as expected because they experienced the most extreme inflation during the boom years. But the pain is no longer confined there. Calgary, once proudly touted as somehow immune to the national mania, is now stagnating badly. Sellers continue to cling to fantasy asking prices while serious buyers simply refuse to engage. Quebec and Atlantic Canada appear relatively steadier only because their bubbles were smaller and more anchored in genuine local demand. Yet even in those regions, the shockwaves from Toronto and Vancouver are beginning to ripple outward. No province will escape entirely. Foreign capital, the traditional buyer of last resort that helped prop up prices in Vancouver and Toronto during previous downturns, is fleeing in significant numbers. Why would international investors stay in a jurisdiction that combines high regulatory risk, punitive taxes on non-residents, hostile political rhetoric, and now visibly declining values? They are taking their money to the Caribbean, Southeast Asia, secondary European markets, and anywhere that offers clearer rules and better risk reward. The invisible floor that once supported Canadian property values during tough times has been ripped away. Now we come to the most unforgivable part of this story, the complete failure on the supply side. For years, politicians of all stripes have lectured Canadians about a desperate housing shortage. CMHC projections remain stark. Canada needs approximately 3.5 million additional housing units by 2030, on top of what is already planned, simply to restore affordability levels seen in earlier decades. Some updated estimates push the total need even higher, toward 4.8 million new homes over the next decade. Yet what is actually happening? Housing starts are projected to decline through 2026, 2027, and even into 2028. New construction is languishing at historically low levels precisely when we need it most. Why? Because developers cannot sell what they have already built. Pre-construction sales have dried up almost completely. Financing for new projects has become punishingly expensive. Labor and material costs remain sky high. Municipal approval processes in Toronto and Vancouver are still measured in years rather than months. The $1.3 billion GTA rental conversion fund announced with great fanfare, it is a drop in the ocean, targeting only about 200 units out of more than 20,000 empty condominiums in the region. It is a press release masquerading as serious policy. Public-private partnerships, often managed by the very same banking and development insiders who helped inflate the original bubble, now ask Canadian taxpayers to bail out their overbuilt inventory. This is not compassionate governance. This is cronyism dressed up in the language of affordability. High immigration targets, valuable in principle for economic and demographic reasons, have dramatically supercharged demand. Yet there was never any serious, coordinated effort to liberalize supply at the same pace. Zoning restrictions, exorbitant development charges, rent controls in many jurisdictions, and NIMBY local councils have strangled new building for more than a decade. We have engineered the worst of all possible worlds, homes that remain unaffordable for young families and first-time buyers, while new supply remains critically short for years to come. This is not bad luck. This is a policy failure of historic and staggering proportions. Let us not look away from the human and generational cost. Millennials and younger Canadians, the generation repeatedly told to work hard, save money, and buy a home, are being locked out, possibly permanently. Even if prices fall another 10 to 15%, The combination of stricter mortgage stress tests, stagnant real wages for many, elevated interest rates, and high overall cost of living makes ownership an increasingly distant dream for anyone without substantial family wealth. Homeownership rates among young adults are falling. More adult children are living with their parents well into their 30s. Entire urban centers risk becoming exclusive playgrounds for the already wealthy and those fortunate enough to inherit property. This is no longer just an economic issue. It is becoming a deep social fracture that will echo through Canadian society for decades, breeding resentment, reducing upward mobility, and undermining the fundamental promise that hard work and responsibility should be rewarded. Families who did everything right, who saved diligently, bought at what they believed was the top of a strong market, and stretched their budgets responsibly, now face negative equity, constant anxiety, and the monthly terror of renewal notices. Some are quietly choosing strategic default or walking away from properties. Others are drowning in silence, cutting back on everything from groceries to vacations to children's activities just to keep the roof over their heads. On social media and in private conversations, the stories are heartbreaking and multiplying daily. This reckoning was entirely avoidable. For years, Canadians were sold the myth that real estate was a one-way ticket to wealth. Governments at every level pushed demand-side stimulus while systematically choking off supply through regulation and delay. Central banks kept interest rates artificially low for far too long, inflating asset bubbles. Now the illusion has collapsed, and ordinary families are paying the price. The path forward is not more subsidies, more bailouts, more demand-side gimmicks, or more taxpayer-funded rescues for developers. Those will only prolong the agony and set the stage for the next even larger bubble. What Canada desperately needs is bold, supply-side shock therapy rooted in economic reality. We must slash approval timelines from years to months. We must radically reform zoning, especially around transit corridors and existing infrastructure. We must overhaul or eliminate development charges that effectively punish the creation of new homes. We must allow markets to clear properly so that sellers finally accept the losses that the market has already priced in, and genuine buyers can enter at realistic, sustainable levels. We must prioritize actual housing abundance over protecting the paper wealth of incumbent owners. Sellers must accept that much of the extraordinary price gains of 2020-2022 were illusory, created by ultra-low rates, massive fiscal stimulus, and speculation rather than genuine fundamentals. Buyers must understand that true long-term affordability will come from increased supply and responsive markets, not from central bank manipulation or government handouts. This is not the end of the Canadian housing dream, but it will become the end if we continue to refuse reality. Canada has faced hard reckonings before, the painful fiscal reforms of the 1990s, for example, and emerged stronger, more competitive, and more confident. We can do it again, but only if our political class finally finds the courage to stop treating housing primarily as a wealth creation machine for current owners and starts treating it as a fundamental need best delivered by open, competitive, and responsive markets. The market is screaming the truth at us every single day. Builders' confidence is in the gutter, delinquencies are rising, construction is freezing. Families are breaking under the strain. Prices continue to grind lower in the most inflated markets. The time for denial, half measures, and political theater is over. The time for fundamental structural change is now. Canadians deserve better. Our children and grandchildren deserve the opportunity that previous generations had. It is time to stop managing decline and start building abundance again.